I walked into the most expensive country club in Alabama for my son's engagement party, and the first thing I heard was the bride whispering to her friends with a sneer, "The stinky country boy is here." My throat tightened. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a deep, quiet anger. I turned to leave to salvage the last shred of my dignity, but my son Trey grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, painful. I expected an apology. I expected him to defend his father. Instead, he leaned in and whispered something that froze the blood in my veins. "Don't you dare walk out of here, old man. I mortgaged your farm this morning. If you leave this party and embarrass me, you will lose everything by sunrise, including Mom's grave." My name is Luther Banks. I am 67 years old. For 40 years, I have tilled the black soil of Alabama, growing cotton and soybeans until my back bent and my hands became as rough as tree bark. I thought I was raising a son to be a man of honor. I sent him to the best universities. I paid for his fancy suits. I thought I was building a legacy. But standing there in that ballroom, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and people who looked at me like I was the dirt on their shoes, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I hadn't raised a son. I had raised a monster. And that monster was about to find out that you never corner a man who has nothing left to lose but his land. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand alone against people who underestimated you. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The air in the ballroom was cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence that fell the moment I stepped through the double doors. I was wearing my Sunday best, a charcoal suit I had bought 10 years ago for my wife Beatrice's funeral. It was clean. I had pressed it myself that morning on the ironing board in the kitchen, but I knew what they saw. They saw the fraying cuffs. They saw the style that was 2 decades out of date. And they smelled the one thing I could never scrub off my skin, the scent of soil, the scent of hard work. Paige Vanderbilt stood in the center of the room like an ice sculpture wrapped in white silk. She was beautiful in the way a polished diamond is beautiful. Cold, hard, sharp. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and she waved the other in front of her nose as if wafting away a bad smell. Her friends, a circle of women with identical blonde hair and identical cruel smiles, giggled. "Look at him," Paige said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "He looks like he just crawled out of a tractor. Trey, did you not tell your father to shower before coming to a place like this?" The laughter that followed was like the sound of breaking glass. It cut me. I stood there clutching my old hat in my hands. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell them that this suit was paid for with honest money, that the smell they despised was the smell of the land that put food on their tables. But before I could open my mouth, a security guard in a blazer that cost more than my truck stepped into my path. "Sir," the guard said, his voice low and condescending. "The service entrance is around the back. Deliveries do not come through the main lobby." He thought I was the help. He thought I was there to deliver vegetables or take out the trash. I looked at Trey, my son, my only child. He was standing next to Paige wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He looked like them. He acted like them. He was looking at me, but there was no love in his eyes. There was only annoyance. He didn't step forward to say, "That is my father." He didn't tell the guard to step aside. He just took a sip of his drink and looked away. That was the moment I decided to leave. I had endured droughts. I had endured floods. I had endured the death of my beloved Beatrice. I did not need to endure this. I turned my back on the sparkling lights and the laughter. I put my hand on the brass handle of the door. I was going to go back to my truck drive home to my farm, sit on my porch, and forget I ever had a son. But I never made it out the door. Trey moved faster than I thought he could. He crossed the room and clamped his hand around my bicep. His fingers dug into my muscle. It wasn't a hug, it was a restraint. "Where do you think you are going?" he hissed. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and mint. "I am going home, Trey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am clearly not welcome here, and I will not stay where I am not respected." "You are staying," he said. His voice dropped to a whisper, a venomous sound that only I could hear. "You are going to walk back in there. You are going to smile. You are going to shake hands with Richard and Caroline. And you are going to pretend you are the happy, grateful country bumpkin father." "Why would I do that?" I asked, trying to pull my arm away. Because you have no choice, Trey said. And then, he dropped the bomb that destroyed my world. I forged your signature this morning, Dad. I used the power of attorney you signed last year for the tractor loan. I leveraged the entire farm, the house, the fields, the barn, everything. I stopped struggling. The room seemed to tilt. You did what? I have debts, Dad, Trey said, and for a second the arrogance slipped and I saw panic. Bad debts, crypto, poker. It doesn't matter. I owe a lot of money. I needed collateral. So I used the farm. If you walk out of here and ruin this engagement, Richard will pull his investment in my firm. If he pulls the investment, I can't make the payments. And if I miss the payment tomorrow morning, the bank seizes your land. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. His eyes were wild. Mom is buried under the oak tree behind the house, Dad. If the bank takes the farm, they will dig her up and pave over her to build a subdivision. Do you want that? Do you want Mom to be bulldozed because you were too proud to eat some cold appetizers? I looked at him. I looked for the little boy who used to run through the cornfields laughing. I looked for the young man who cried when his mother died, promising to protect her legacy. He was gone. In his place was a stranger, a desperate, greedy stranger who had sold his soul and my life to keep up appearances. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier. It was the death of hope. Fine, I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. I will stay, Good Trey said, instantly releasing my arm and smoothing his jacket. He smiled a fake bright smile for the room. That is a good boy. Now go sit down. Paige had a table set up for you. He pointed to the far corner of the room near the swinging doors of the kitchen and the restrooms, a small table hidden in the shadows. I walked to the table. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me. I heard their whispers. Is that the father? Why does he look like that, poor Paige? I sat down. The chair was wobbly. There was no centerpiece on my table, just a half-empty basket of bread rolls that looked like they had been taken from another table. I sat there while the party swirled around me. I watched my son laugh with men who looked like they had never worked a day in their lives. I watched him kiss Paige, the woman who had called me Stinky, and realized they were perfect for each other. Both hollow, both cruel. A shadow fell over my table. I looked up. It was Richard Vanderbilt, Paige's father, the patriarch of this nest of vipers. He was a tall man with silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from expensive marble. He held a cigar in one hand and a tumbler of whiskey in the other. He didn't offer me a drink. So you are Luther, he said. He didn't ask. He stated it, like he was identifying a fungus on his lawn. I am, I said. I didn't stand up. Richard looked around the room, taking in the opulence that he likely paid for with money he didn't actually have. He leaned down, bringing his face close to mine. He smelled of old leather and arrogance. Trey tells me you have about 500 acres out on Highway 9, he said. That is right, I said. My family has worked that land for 3 generations. Richard chuckled. A dry sound. 3 generations of dirt farmers. What a waste. You know, Luther, I am a developer. I have a vision. He gestured with his cigar ash falling onto the tablecloth near my hand. When Trey and Paige take over that property, and they will take over sooner rather than later, we are going to change things. That old farmhouse of yours, the one with the rotting wood, we are going to burn it down. It is an eyesore. We are going to flatten those cornfields. Put in a 18-hole golf course. Maybe a clubhouse right where your barn stands. He smiled, a shark showing its teeth. It will be an improvement, Luther. It will finally smell like money instead of manure. You should be grateful. Your son is marrying up. He is elevating your bloodline. Try not to ruin it for him by existing too loudly tonight. He patted my shoulder. 2 hard, condescending taps. Then he walked away laughing as he rejoined his wife Caroline, who was busy judging the waiters. I sat there frozen. My hand gripped a fork so hard the metal began to bend. Burn it down. He wanted to burn down the house where Beatrice and I spent 40 years, where we raised Trey, where I held Beatrice's hand as she took her last breath. He wanted to pave over the soil that my grandfather bought with his freedom money. He wanted to turn my life's work into a playground for men who played games while men like me fed the world. And Trey, my son. He knew this. He had agreed to this. He had forged my signature not just to pay a debt but to hand over my legacy to these vultures. I looked at the breadbasket. I looked at the kitchen doors swinging open and shut, giving me glimpses of the staff working, sweating, rushing. They looked more like family to me than the people in this room. Something shifted inside me. It was a click, like a lock snapping shut or a trigger being pulled. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't ashamed of my suit or my smell. I was a farmer, and a farmer knows that before you plant a new crop, sometimes you have to clear the weeds. You have to burn the field to get rid of the pests. Trey thought he had me trapped. He thought the threat of the mortgage and his mother's grave would make me obedient. He thought I was just a senile old man who would sign whatever was put in front of him to save his son. He was wrong. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed against the cool glass of my old flip phone. I didn't use it much, but I knew one number by heart: Henderson. Henderson wasn't a fancy lawyer with a billboard on the highway. Henderson was the man who sat next to me in the trenches in Vietnam 50 years ago. He was the man who dragged me 3 miles through the mud when I took shrapnel in my leg. He was now the sharpest land rights attorney in the state, even if he operated out of a strip mall office next to a laundromat. And 5 years ago, when I first started noticing the greed in Trey's eyes, Henderson and I had set up a failsafe, a specific legal structure for the farm that Trey knew nothing about. I watched Trey laughing at the head table, raising a glass of champagne. He looked so confident. He thought he had won. I opened my phone under the table. I typed a text message. My fingers were thick and clumsy on the small keys, but I didn't make a mistake. Code red. The rats are in the corn. Activate protocol B. I hit send. I took a breath. The air in the ballroom still smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy, but underneath it I could smell something else. Faint but distinct. It was the smell of a storm coming. I picked up a roll from the basket and took a bite. It was stale, but I chewed it slowly. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. I was going to stay right here. I was going to watch them celebrate. I was going to let them climb as high as they could, because the higher they climbed, the harder they would fall when I cut the ladder out from under them. Trey looked over at me. He saw me eating the bread. He smirked and whispered something to Paige. She giggled. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just the stinky country boy happy for a crumb. Enjoy it, son, I thought. Enjoy the champagne, because it is the last thing you are ever going to taste that you didn't pay for with your own sweat. The waiter walked by and dropped a napkin. I picked it up. Sir, let me get that, the waiter said, rushing over. No, son. I said, my voice calm and deep. I got it. I wiped my mouth. Let the games begin. The party was still roaring behind the double doors, but the hallway was quiet and cold. Trey did not let go of my arm. He dragged me past the kitchen staff who looked down at the floor and past the security guards who smirked. We were not going to the exit. We were going deeper into the country club, into the private wing where the real business was conducted. Trey stopped in front of a heavy mahogany door and pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of stale cigar smoke and lemon polish. It was a library or an office lined with books that looked like they had never been opened. Paige was already there, sitting on the edge of a massive leather desk. She was swinging her legs back and forth like a bored child. Next to her stood a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, and his smile was too sharp. He held a leather briefcase against his chest like a shield. Close the door, Trey said. He shoved me into a chair. It was a low chair designed to make the person sitting in it feel small while everyone else towered over them. I sat down and placed my hat on my knees. I looked at my son. He was pacing back and forth, his hands running through his hair. He looked like a trapped animal. What is this? I asked, my voice calm. This is the solution, Paige said. She hopped off the desk and picked up a stack of papers from the briefcase man. She threw them onto the desk in front of me. The papers slid across the polished wood and stopped just inches from my hands. Sign it, she said. I looked down. The top page was titled General Durable Power of Attorney. I knew what those words meant. I had seen them before when my own father lost his mind to dementia and we had to take care of him. But I was not my father. My mind was as sharp as a plow blade. This gives you control over everything, I said, looking up at Trey. My bank accounts, my medical decisions, the farm. It is for your own good, Dad, Trey said, stopping his pacing. He leaned against the mantel of the fireplace, trying to look casual, but his eyes were twitching. "You are getting old. You are forgetful. We are worried about you. We do not want you to get scammed by some con artist. We will keep the farm safe. We will manage the accounts. You will not have to worry about a thing." "You mean I will not have to worry because I will own nothing," I said. "Stop being dramatic," Paige snapped. "You are senile, Luther. We all see it. You talk to Mom like she is still alive. You forget where you put your keys. Last week you left the tractor running in the barn. That was a lie. I never left the tractor running. Fuel cost too much to waste. But I saw the narrative they were building. They were rewriting reality to fit their greed." "I am not signing this," I said. I stood up. "I am leaving." Trey moved faster than light. He slammed his hand down on the desk, making the papers jump. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. "You are not going anywhere," he shouted. His face was red. The veins in his neck were bulging. "You are going to sign that paper right now." Or what I challenged him. "You will mortgage the farm. You already did that. You will kick me out. You are already trying to do that. What else can you take from me, Trey?" Trey smiled. It was a cruel, ugly smile that did not belong on my son's face. "I can take your name," he whispered. I froze. "Do you think the people in this town know about 1980? He asked softly. "Do you think Richard and Caroline know that their daughter is marrying the son of a convicted felon?" My breath caught in my throat. 1980. The year I lost 2 years of my life. I was 22 years old, driving home from a late shift at the mill. A store had been robbed 3 towns over. The police were looking for a black man in a truck. Any black man. Any truck. They pulled me over. They planted a gun under my seat. I spent 24 months in a cell the size of a closet before the real robber was caught and confessed. I was exonerated. My record was expunged. But the shame, the memory of the cage, the smell of the prison yard, those things never left me. I had never told anyone in this town except Beatrice. And Beatrice had told Trey on her deathbed, making him promise to never judge me for it. Now he was using it as a weapon. Imagine the headlines. Trey continued, his voice silky and dangerous. "Local farmer hid violent criminal past. Fraud. Theft. Who knows what else we could dig up or invent. If you do not sign this paper, I will leak the mugshot. I will tell everyone you are a danger to society. I will ruin your reputation so thoroughly that you won't be able to buy a bag of seed in this county without people spitting on you." I looked at him and I felt something inside me die. The last tiny ember of hope that my son was just misguided or desperate was extinguished. This was evil, pure, calculated evil. He was willing to destroy his own father's history to secure his future. I sat back down slowly. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble. I needed them to see a broken man. I needed them to see a victim. "You promised your mother," I whispered. "You promised you would never speak of that." "Mom is dead," Trey said coldly. "And business is business. Sign the papers, Dad. Do not make me destroy you." I looked at the papers. I looked at the lawyer who was staring at the ceiling, pretending he wasn't witnessing blackmail. I looked at Paige, who was checking her reflection in her compact mirror. And then I remembered. I remembered a rainy afternoon 5 years ago. I was sitting in Henderson's office, the small room next to the laundromat that smelled of detergent and old paper. Henderson had poured us 2 fingers of cheap bourbon. "Luther," he had said, "if that boy of yours ever goes bad, he is going to go after the land. It is the only thing of value he sees." "What do?" I had asked. "We separate it," Henderson had said. "We split the atom. In this state, land ownership and mineral rights can be 2 different things. You keep the surface rights in your name. That is the dirt, the corn, the house. But the mineral rights, everything below the grassroots, we put that into a separate LLC, a holding company, and we make you the employee of that company, not the owner." I had signed the papers that day. I didn't think I would ever need them. I didn't think there was anything under my soil but worms and rocks. But Henderson was paranoid, and I trusted him. Black Soil Minerals LLC was the owner of everything beneath my feet. And the sole beneficiary of that company was not me, and it was certainly not Trey. It was a charitable trust set up in Beatrice's name. Trey could sell the surface, he could build a golf course, he could pave it over, but he could not sell what lay beneath. And if he tried to dig, if he tried to develop, he would need the permission of the mineral rights owner. Me. But he didn't know that. He looked at the farm and saw one big piece of pie. He didn't know I had already eaten the filling and left him only the crust. I looked up at Trey. I let a tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't hard. I was crying for the loss of my son, not for the loss of my land. "Please," I said, my voice cracking, "please don't send me away. That house is all I have. Beatrice is there." "Sign the paper," Old Man Page said, snapping her compact shut. "Stop begging. It is pathetic." I reached for the pen. My hand shook. I made sure it shook. I hovered the tip of the pen over the signature line. "I will sign," I said softly. "But you have to promise not to tell anyone about 1980. "I promise," Trey said instantly. His eyes were glued to the pen. He was hungry for it. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote my name. Luther Banks. But I did something else. Something Henderson had taught me. If you are ever forced to sign something, Henderson had said, if you ever have a gun to your head or a knife to your throat, sign your name, but leave off the tail on the S. And put a small dot after your first name. That is our code. That means duress. That means the signature is void. I wrote Luther. I put a small dot. I wrote Banks. I let the S trail off without the underline I had used on every check and document for 40 years. It looked real. To anyone who didn't know, it looked like the shaky signature of a defeated old man. I pushed the paper across the desk. Trey grabbed it. He didn't look at the letters. He didn't look at the dot. He just saw his victory. He grinned and handed the paper to the lawyer, who stamped it immediately. "Done," Trey said. He let out a long breath. He looked at me and his face changed. The mask of the desperate son fell away and the face of the landlord appeared. "Get out," he said. What I asked. "Get out of my office," Trey said. "Get out of this party, and get out of my house. You have 24 hours to pack your things." "But you said you would manage the assets," I stammered. "You said I would be safe." "You will be safe," Page said, smiling. "We found a lovely facility for you. It is state-run, so it is free. They specialize in severe dementia cases. You will fit right in. The county poorhouse, the place where they sent the indigent and the forgotten. That was their plan. They weren't going to care for me. They were going to discard me." I stood up. I didn't have to pretend to be shaky anymore. My knees felt weak, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the betrayal. "You are my son," I whispered. "I am a businessman," Trey corrected. "And you are a liability. Now go, before I have security drag you out." I turned and walked to the door. I opened it and the sound of the party rushed in to meet me. Laughter, music, clinking glasses, a celebration paid for with my blood and my sweat. I walked out of the office. I didn't look back. I walked through the kitchen, past the startled chefs, and out the back door into the cool night air. I stood in the parking lot next to my old truck. I looked up at the moon. It was the same moon that shone on my fields, the same moon that shone on Beatrice's grave. Trey had the paper. He thought he had the power. He thought he had won. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed Henderson's number again. "It is done," I said. "Did you sign?" Henderson asked, his voice gravelly and rough. "I signed," I said. "With the dot. And without the tail." "Good," Henderson said. "They took the bait. Now we wait." "Wait for what?" I asked. "Wait for them to dig," Henderson said. The sun had not even crested the horizon when the noise began. It wasn't the familiar chug of my old tractor or the crow of the rooster that usually signaled the start of my day. It was a low, mechanical growl that vibrated through the floorboards of my house. It sounded like a beast waking up hungry. I was sitting at my kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee, trying to wash away the bitter taste of the previous night. The signature I had put on that paper felt like a stain on my soul. I thought I had 24 hours. Trey had said 24 hours to pack. But the growl outside told me that the wolves were not patient. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. My heart hammered against my ribs. A convoy of trucks was rolling up my driveway. Not pickup trucks. These were massive flatbeds carrying heavy machinery, yellow excavators, bulldozers with blades the size of my living room. They looked like tanks invading a peaceful country. And leading them was a white SUV with the logo of a survey company plastered on the side. They didn't stop at the house. They didn't knock on the door. They drove straight past the porch and veered off the gravel road directly into the south pasture. "No," I whispered the word. The south pasture wasn't just grass. It was where Beatrice had planted her zinnias 40 years ago. Every spring that field exploded in color. Red, orange, pink. It was her pride. It was where we took our anniversary photos. It was the only part of the farm I never tilled for crops because Beatrice said the earth needed to be beautiful, just as much as it needed to be useful. The lead bulldozer dropped its blade. I heard the sickening crunch of metal hitting earth. It tore into the soil, ripping up the dormant flower beds, flipping the dark earth over like a scar. I didn't think. I reacted. I ran to the gun cabinet by the back door. My hands were steady now. The trembling from the lawyer's office was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. I grabbed my double-barrel shotgun. I didn't load it. I didn't intend to shoot anyone. But in Alabama, a man walking out with a shotgun speaks a language that everyone understands. I kicked the screen door open and marched out onto the porch. The morning air was cool, but my blood was boiling. "Get off my land!" I bellowed. My voice was loud enough to cut through the engine noise. The driver of the SUV stepped out. He was a thick-set man with a clipboard and a bright orange vest. He looked at me, then he looked at the gun. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't look scared. He looked bored. He signaled to the bulldozer operator to cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. "You are trespassing," I shouted, walking down the steps. "Turn those machines around or I will call the sheriff." The man in the orange vest smiled. It was a tired, patronizing smile. He walked toward me, meeting me halfway between the porch and the ruined pasture. "Mr. Banks," I assume he said, "put the toy away before you hurt yourself. We are not trespassing. We have a work order." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his clipboard and held it out. I didn't take it. I kept my grip on the shotgun. I didn't order any work, I said. "This is my farm, and you are tearing up my wife's garden." "Your son ordered it," the man said. "Trey Banks. He called us at 6 this morning, said it was an emergency rush job. He wants the soil samples and the topographical survey done by noon. Said something about expediting a loan." Trey. He hadn't even waited for the ink to dry. He hadn't even waited for me to pack a bag. He was erasing me. He was erasing Beatrice. "I don't care what my son said," I spat. "He doesn't own this land yet. I do. Now get out." The man sighed. He shook the paper at me. "Look, old-timer, I don't want any trouble. But this right here is a copy of a general power of attorney signed and notarized yesterday evening. It gives your son full authority to manage this property. Legally speaking, his voice is your voice, and his voice said dig." He pointed to the bulldozer. "Now you can stand there with that empty gun and go to jail for menacing a worker, or you can go back inside and pack your boxes like a good boy. If you pull that trigger, you die in prison. If you call the sheriff, he will look at this paper and he will tell you the exact same thing. You gave away your rights, Mr. Banks. Don't get mad at me because you have buyer's remorse." He turned his back on me. He waved his hand at the bulldozer operator. "Fire it up," he yelled. The engine roared back to life. Black smoke belched into the clean morning air. The blade dropped again, crushing the remaining zinnias, turning my memories into mud. I stood there, defeated. The shotgun felt heavy and useless in my hands. The man was right. I had signed the paper. I had signed it to save my reputation, but in doing so I had doomed my sanctuary. I watched them tear up the earth for another minute, feeling every gouge in the soil as if it were happening to my own flesh. Then I turned and walked back into the house. I closed the door and locked it, as if that could keep the destruction out. I needed help. I needed to know what I was fighting. I went to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I dialed Henderson. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Luther," Henderson said. His voice was rough with sleep. "It is 7 in the morning. Did you do it?" "They are here, Henderson," I said. My voice was shaking. "Bulldozers. They are digging up Beatrice's garden. Trey sent them." "I know," Henderson said. "I saw the filing." Trey didn't waste a second. He registered that power of attorney with the county clerk at 8 a.m. sharp. "But listen to me, Luther. I have been up all night. I dug into the people behind this. The Vanderbilts." "What about them?" I asked. I watched through the window as men stuck red flags into the soil, marking the spots where they would pour concrete. "They are a house of cards," Luther Henderson said. His voice dropped low, conspiratorial. "I ran a comprehensive asset check. I have a friend at the bank they use in Atlanta. Richard Vanderbilt isn't a tycoon. He is a drowning man." "What do you mean drowning?" I asked. "I mean they are broke," Henderson said. "Completely tapped out. They owe $15 million to creditors all over the South. They have leveraged every property they own. Their yacht is about to be repossessed. That country club membership is probably the only thing they haven't defaulted on yet because they need it for appearances. I leaned against the counter. $15 million. It was a number I couldn't even comprehend. Why do they want my farm? I asked. It isn't worth that much, even with the golf course. It is collateral, Henderson explained. It is fresh meat. They need a new unencumbered asset to show the bank. If they can show they own 500 acres of prime development land, the bank will extend their credit line. They will get a construction loan for the golf course, probably $20 million. They will use that loan to pay off the interest on their old debts and keep the lifestyle going for another year. It's a Ponzi scheme, I whispered. Exactly, Henderson said. And Trey is the sucker. He thinks he is marrying into royalty. He thinks he is becoming a partner, but they are just using him. They need his clean credit and your land to stay afloat. Once they get the loan, they will bleed the project dry and leave Trey holding the bag. Your son isn't just selling you out, Luther. He is walking into a trap that will destroy him. I looked out the window again. The bulldozer was moving toward the barn now. Trey wasn't just a villain, he was a fool. A desperate, greedy fool who was being played by people who were even greedier than he was. He was destroying his heritage to buy a ticket onto a sinking ship. So we stop them, I said. We use the mineral rights. We show them the LLC paperwork. We tell them they can't build a golf course because the Black Soil Minerals Company doesn't authorize it. Henderson said. I can file an injunction this morning. I can have a sheriff's deputy out there in an hour to shut down those bulldozers. We can reveal that you don't own the subsurface rights and that any development requires the consent of the trust. It will stop the loan. It will save the farm today. I opened my mouth to say, do it. To say, save my home. Save Beatrice's garden. But then I hesitated. If we stop them now, Trey learns nothing. If we stop them now, Richard Vanderbilt just walks away and finds another victim. If we stop them now, I am just the stubborn old man who ruined his son's big break. Trey will hate me forever. He will blame me for his failure. He will never understand that I saved him. I looked at the photograph of Beatrice on the mantel. She was smiling. She always told me I was too soft on the boy. She told me I shielded him too much. Let him fall, Luther, she used to say. A man only learns when he hits the ground. Henderson, I said. Yeah, Luther. Don't file the injunction. There was a silence on the line. What? Let them dig, I said. My voice was hard as flint. Let them survey. Let them draw up their plans. Let them go to the bank. Let them sign the loan papers. Luther, are you sure? Henderson asked. They are destroying your property. Let them, I repeated. I want them to think they have won. I want Richard to smell that money. I want Trey to feel like a big shot. I want them to climb so high that they can't see the ground anymore. Why? Henderson asked. Because if I cut the ladder now, they just fall a few feet, I said. They dust themselves off and try again. I don't want them to try again. I want them broken. I want Trey to see exactly who these people are. And I want the Vanderbilts to feel the pain they have inflicted on people like me their whole lives. I watched the bulldozer knock over a fence post. It was a post my father had set 50 years ago. It hurt. It hurt like a physical blow. But I swallowed the pain. Let them get the loan, I said. Let them leverage everything they have left on this project. And then when they are fully committed, when there is no turning back, that is when we pull the rug. You are a hard man, Luther Banks, Henderson said. I never realized how hard. The soil is hard, Henderson, I said. That is why it yields a harvest. So we wait, Henderson asked. We wait, I said. I am going to pack my bag. I am going to let them kick me out. I am going to go to that poorhouse or wherever they want to send me. I will play the part. All right, Henderson said. I will get the papers ready. But Luther, watching them tear up your home is going to be hell. I know, I said. I watched the bulldozer blades scrape against the side of the barn. But I have walked through hell before. This time, I am bringing the fire with me. I hung up the phone. I didn't look out the window again. I went to my bedroom and pulled my old suitcase from under the bed. I packed my clothes. I packed Beatrice's photo. I packed my Bible. I left the rest, the furniture, the dishes, the life we had built. It was just stuff. The real legacy was in the dirt, and the dirt wasn't going anywhere. I walked out the front door, past the survey crew who ignored me, past the orange flags that marked the death of my farm. I got into my truck and drove away. As I turned onto the main road, I saw Trey's car speeding toward the house. He was coming to oversee the destruction. He was coming to make sure I was gone. I didn't wave. I just gripped the steering wheel and drove. Go ahead, son, I thought. Build your castle. But you are building it on land that you do not own. And when the earth opens up to swallow you, don't look for my hand to pull you out. You dug this hole. Now you have to live in it. The black Mercedes SUV looked like an alien spaceship parked in front of my porch. It was gleaming and spotless, and it cost more than every piece of equipment I had in the barn combined. Trey and Paige stepped out of the vehicle and into the dust of the driveway. Paige was wearing white stiletto heels. I watched from the rocking chair as her heels sank immediately into the soft Alabama red clay. She let out a shriek of disgust that sent the crows flying from the pecan tree. I did not get up to help her. I just rocked back and forth. The wood of the chair creaked a rhythm I had known for 40 years. They approached the house like they were inspecting a crime scene or a garbage dump. Paige held a silk handkerchief over her nose. She looked at the peeling paint on the railings. She looked at the flower pots that were now empty because the bulldozers had crushed the garden. She looked at me. This place is a disaster, she said. Her voice was not a whisper this time. It was a statement of fact. She didn't even say hello. Trey walked up behind her. He was wearing designer jeans and a polo shirt that was too tight. He looked at the house where he had taken his first steps, and I saw nothing in his eyes but calculation. It is rough, babe, Trey said, putting a hand on her waist. But the bones of the land are good. We just have to clear the debris. Debris. That is what he called the home I built with my own hands. That is what he called the roof that sheltered him from the storms. Paige walked up the steps and kicked a loose board on the porch. A piece of rotten wood broke off and clattered to the ground. It is not just rough, Trey, she said. It is a health hazard. Look at this wood. It is infested. The whole structure is probably full of termites and mold. We cannot renovate this. It would cost a fortune to bring it up to code for the clubhouse. She turned to him and pointed a manicured finger at my front door. Burn it, she said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Burn it. She wanted to burn the kitchen where Beatrice had taught Trey to bake cornbread. She wanted to burn the living room where we opened Christmas presents. She wanted to burn the bedroom where I still slept on my side of the bed, leaving room for a ghost. Trey looked at me, then he looked at the house. For a second, I thought he might hesitate. I thought he might remember the height chart we carved into the doorframe of the pantry. I thought he might remember the nights we spent on this porch listening to the rain. Burn it, Trey agreed. He nodded his head. You are right, babe. It is trash. We will level it. A controlled burn is cheaper than demolition anyway. We can claim it was an electrical fire and maybe get a little extra from the insurance before we break ground on the golf course. He was talking about insurance fraud now. He was talking about arson. And he was doing it right in front of me because he thought I was already gone. He thought I was just a piece of furniture waiting to be moved. I felt the rage rising in my chest, hot and sharp. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to grab him by the collar and throw him off my porch. I wanted to tell him that he was the only trash on this property. But I remembered Henderson's advice. Let them climb Luther. Let them think they are untouchable. So I swallowed the rage. I let it burn a hole in my stomach, and I slumped my shoulders. I let my jaw go slack. I made my eyes look glassy and distant. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I had to become the weak old man they wanted me to be. I looked up at Trey and blinked slowly. Is your mother coming home soon, son? I asked. My voice sounded thin and wavering. She went to the market this morning to get flour for the biscuits. She should be back by now. The stove is cold. Trey froze. He looked at me and his eyes narrowed. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He turned to Paige. Did you hear that he asked her? Hear what Paige asked, looking at her muddy shoes with disdain. He thinks Mom is at the market, Trey said. He let out a laugh that sounded like a bark. Mom has been dead for 10 years, Paige. He has completely lost it. Paige looked at me. Her expression changed from disgust to delight. It was the look of a predator spotting a limp in the prey. Are you serious? She asked. He does not know she is dead. Watch this, Trey said. He leaned down and spoke to me loudly like I was deaf. Dad, Mom is not coming home. Mom is gone. Do you remember? I furrowed my brow. I looked around the yard, pretending to be confused. Gone, I repeated. No, she said she was making peach cobbler. She promised. Why is she so late? I am hungry, Trey. Where is my supper? Trey stood up and clapped his hands together. This is perfect, he said to Paige. Do you see this? This is the golden ticket. What do you mean? Paige asked. The competency hearing, Trey said. We do not need to forge anything complicated. We do not need to pay off expensive doctors to lie. We just need to record him. If the judge sees this, if the judge sees him asking for his dead wife, he will grant me guardianship in 5 minutes. It will be a slam dunk. We can put him in the state facility by the end of the week." Paige smiled. It was a smile that made her look like a shark. "Can we do it before the wedding?" she asked. "I do not want him there, Trey. You saw him at the engagement party. He is an embarrassment. If he starts asking for dead people in front of my father, I will die of shame." "We will try," Trey promised. "But even if we cannot get the court order by Saturday, we will keep him hidden. We will stick him at a table in the back, but after the honeymoon he is gone. I promise you, babe. He will be in a room with padded walls, and we will be sitting on this porch drinking wine. They discussed my imprisonment right in front of my face. They planned the destruction of my life as if I were a dog that needed to be put down. They didn't even lower their voices. Why would they? To them, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a problem to be solved." I looked down at my hands so they wouldn't see the clarity in my eyes. I thought about Beatrice. I thought about how she would have slapped Trey into next week for speaking like this. But I used her memory for fuel. I used the pain of her absence to sharpen my mind. "I am thirsty," I mumbled. I gripped the armrests of the rocking chair. "Can I have some sweet tea? Beatrice always makes the tea." Trey rolled his eyes. "Go make some tea, Dad," he said dismissively. "Go inside and play in the kitchen while the adults talk." I struggled to my feet, I made sure to stumble a little. I leaned heavily on the doorframe. "I will make tea," I said. "I will make tea for the guests." Beatrice would want me to be polite. I shuffled into the house. As soon as the screen door slammed behind me, my posture straightened. The fog in my eyes cleared. I moved quickly and silently across the living room to the old roll-top desk in the corner. I opened the bottom drawer and reached into the back behind the boxes of old tax returns. My hand closed around a small, cold metal object. It was a listening device. Not a cheap one you buy online. This was military-grade surplus, a relic from Henderson's days in intelligence. It was the size of a quarter, and it had a battery life of 3 days. I had been saving it for a moment like this. I grabbed the device and slipped it into my pocket. Then I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on the stove just to make noise. I clattered some cups. I needed them to think I was busy. Through the window I could see them on the porch. Paige had put her bag down on the railing. It was a Birkin bag. Orange leather. It cost more than my truck. She was standing with her back to it, holding her phone up in the air. She was live streaming. "Hey guys," she was saying to her phone, her voice pitching up an octave into a fake, cheerful squeal. "Just checking out the new property. It is a bit of a fixer-upper right now, but just wait until you see what we do with it. We are going to have the most amazing clubhouse right here." Trey was standing next to her, preening for the camera. I poured 3 cups of water. I didn't bother with tea bags. I put them on a tray. I needed a reason to get close to that bag. I kicked the screen door open again. I walked out carrying the tray with shaking hands. The water slopped over the sides of the cups. "Tea," I said. "I brought tea for the nice lady." Paige didn't even look at me. She was too busy talking to her followers. "And the best part is the view," she was saying. "Look at those hills. All of this is going to be ours. We are building a legacy." I walked past them. I moved toward the railing where the orange bag sat open. "Careful, Dad," Trey snapped, not looking away from the phone. "Don't drop that." I stumbled. It was a calculated slip. I lurched forward toward the railing. I used my body to block their view of the bag for just a second. "Whoops," I said. I steadied myself against the wood. In that split second, my hand dipped into my pocket. I palmed the device. I reached out as if to steady the bag and dropped the small metal disc into the side pocket of the orange leather lining. It slid down deep into the corner hidden by her wallet and her makeup kit. I pulled my hand back. It was done. I put the tray down on the small table next to the railing. "There," I said. "Tea," you, Paige said, glancing at the cups of hot water. "What is that?" "That isn't tea. It is just dirty water." I looked confused. I scratched my head. Beatrice must have forgotten the sugar, I muttered. "She is getting forgetful." Trey laughed. He put his arm around Paige and kissed her cheek for the camera. "You are the forgetful one, old man," he said. "Now go back inside. We have work to do. We need to measure the perimeter for the fence." I nodded obediently. I turned and shuffled back into the house. I went straight to the kitchen table and sat down. I pulled out my phone and put in the earbuds. I opened the app that Henderson had installed for me. The audio was crystal clear. I heard the birds chirping, I heard the wind in the trees, and then I heard Paige's voice loud and sharp right in my ear. "God, he smells like old soup," she said. "Did you see his fingernails? They were black." "He has been digging in the dirt his whole life," Trey said. "It does not wash off. But don't worry, babe. He won't be a problem much longer." "Are you sure?" Paige asked. "I mean really sure. What if the judge denies the order? What if he fights back?" "He won't fight," Trey said. "He is weak. He has always been weak. He let people walk all over him his whole life. He let the town treat him like a criminal even after he was exonerated. He never stood up for himself. Why do you think I am the way I am? I learned what not to be by watching him. That hurt. That hurt more than the threat of the nursing home. I hadn't been weak. I had been patient. I had been dignified. I had swallowed my pride 1,000 times to give him a better life. And he saw it as weakness. Whatever Paige said. I just want him gone. And I want that money, Trey. My dad is breathing down my neck. The loan sharks are calling your phone every hour. We need to liquidate this place fast. We will." Trey promised. "As soon as he is locked away, we have power of attorney over everything. We sell the surface rights to your dad's company. We cash out his pension. We drain the savings. It will be enough to cover the interest on the debts for a few months until the lithium deal comes through. Wait." I pressed the earbud deeper into my ear. Lithium. I didn't know anything about lithium. Henderson hadn't mentioned lithium. "What lithium deal?" Paige asked, her voice dropping lower. "I didn't tell you," Trey said, his voice smug. "I had a geologist friend come out here a month ago under the guise of looking for water. He took some core samples from the North Ridge," and Paige asked. "And this dirt isn't just good for cotton," Trey said. "There is a massive deposit of lithium under the North Ridge. It is worth millions, Paige. Tens of millions. That is why I need the farm. The golf course is just a cover story for your dad's investors. The real money is under the ground." My heart stopped. Then it started beating again with a slow, heavy rhythm. They weren't just stealing the farm for a golf course. They knew there was a fortune under the soil. A fortune Trey thought he was going to steal from me. But Trey had made a fatal miscalculation. A mistake so big it was going to bury him. He thought owning the land meant owning what was underneath it. He didn't know about Black Soil Minerals, LLC. He didn't know that 5 years ago I had severed the surface rights from the mineral rights. He didn't know that the lithium he was drooling over didn't belong to the farm anymore. It belonged to the trust. And the trustee of that trust was me. I took the earbuds out. I sat in the silence of my kitchen. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just realized he was holding a royal flush while his opponent was betting the house on a pair of twos. "You want to dig, son?" I whispered to the empty room. "Go ahead and dig. You are just digging your own grave." I sat in the dark of my living room with only the moonlight cutting across the floorboards. The house was silent, but my head was filled with noise. I adjusted the volume on my phone and pressed the earbud deeper into my ear canal. The audio feed from the bug I had planted in Paige's bag was crisp and terrifying. I could hear the clinking of silverware and the hum of a restaurant in the background. They were out celebrating the destruction of my life. "We need to finalize the facility details tonight," Paige said. Her voice was sharp. "I called Sunrise Senior Living this afternoon. Do you know how much they want for a semi-private room? $5,000 a month, Trey. $5,000. That is $60,000 a year." "It is a nice place, though," Trey said. His voice sounded muffled, like his mouth was full. "They have a garden. They have activities. It is dignified. Dignified does not pay the mortgage," Paige snapped. "We cannot afford dignified. We are bleeding money. Every cent we squeeze out of that farm needs to go to my dad's creditors or your bookie. We cannot waste $5,000 a month on an old man who thinks his dead wife is making peach cobbler." There was a pause. I heard the sound of liquid being poured into a glass. "So what do you suggest?" Trey asked. "I found another option," Paige said. "The South District State Facility." I felt a cold hand grip my heart. The South District Facility was infamous. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was where the county sent the indigent, the addicts who had burned out their brains, and the elderly who had no one left to fight for them. It was a place of urine smells and concrete floors. "Paige, that place is a hellhole," Trey said. His voice wavered. It is full of criminals and homeless people. They sedate the patients just to keep them quiet. Dad might be losing it, but he is not an animal. He is a liability, Paige hissed, and right now he is a very expensive one. The state facility is free tray, $0. That saves us 60 grand a year. Do you want to save your father's dignity or do you want to save your own skin? Because if we don't make the payments next week, you are going to be the one living on the street. The silence that followed was heavy. I held my breath, waiting for my son to defend me, waiting for him to say that there were lines he would not cross, that throwing his father into a pit of despair was too high a price. Fine, Trey said softly. Do it. Put him in the state home. Just make sure the paperwork says he is a danger to himself so they take him immediately. I closed my eyes. A single tear tracked through the dust on my cheek. He had done it. He had sold me out completely, not just for money, but for convenience. He had agreed to erase my existence to save a few $1,000s. The last thread of loyalty connecting us had just snapped. I took the earbud out. I didn't need to hear anymore. I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair and watched the sun come up over the fields that were no longer mine. When the first light hit the barn roof, I stood up. I washed my face with cold water. I put on my work boots. I didn't put on a suit. I wore my faded denim overalls and my flannel shirt. I wanted them to see the farmer. I drove my battered pickup truck into the city. The suspension squeaked and the engine rattled, but it got me there. I pulled up in front of the First City Bank, the glass tower that loomed over downtown. It was the bank that held the debt for half the businesses in the state. I walked into the lobby. The marble floors echoed under my boots. A security guard stepped forward, his hand hovering near his belt, eyeing my dirty clothes. A young teller looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. They saw a broke old man looking for a loan modification or a handout. I walked past them straight to the elevator. "Sir, you cannot go up there," the guard called out. "Executive offices are by appointment only." "I have an appointment," I said without stopping. I pressed the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, I walked to the corner office. The secretary looked up startled, but before she could speak, the door to the inner office opened. Mr. Vance, the bank president, stepped out. He was a man who knew the value of everything, including secrets. He knew about the lithium. He knew about the trust. He knew that the man in the overalls standing in his lobby was technically one of his biggest depositors. "Luther," he said, smiling and extending his hand. "Come in." "Coffee." "Black," I said. We sat in his office overlooking the city. I didn't waste time with small talk. "I want to talk about the Vanderbilts," I said. Vance sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Richard Vanderbilt," he said. "That name is a headache, Luther. We have been trying to restructure his debt for months. He owes us $15 million. His assets are leveraged to the hilt. The only reason we haven't foreclosed is that he keeps promising a big infusion of capital from a new development deal." "The golf course," I said. "Yes," Vance said. "He claims he has secured prime land and investors." "He hasn't," I said. "The land is in dispute. And his investor is my son who has no money." Vance looked at me. His eyes narrowed. "So the deal is dead?" he asked. "It was never alive," I said. "Richard is drowning Vance, and I want to be the one to throw him the anchor." "What are you proposing?" Vance asked. "I want to buy the debt," I said. "All of it. The $15 million. I want to buy the note." Vance laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Luther, that is a lot of money, even for the trust." "I have the authorization," I said, pulling a folder from my jacket. "Black Soil Minerals, LLC has the liquidity. We will buy the non-performing loan at 60 cents on the dollar. You get $9 million cash today, and you get a toxic asset off your books. I get the paper." Vance looked at the documents. He did the math in his head. He knew the Vanderbilt loan was garbage. Getting $9 million for it was a gift. "Why Luther?" he asked. "Why bail him out?" "I am not bailing him out," I said, my voice cold. "I am buying the right to foreclose. I want to own him, Vance. I want to own his house. I want to own his cars. I want to own the shirt on his back. When the note comes due, I want to be the one holding the pen." Vance looked at me with a new kind of respect. It was the respect you give to a man who walks into a room with a grenade. He pushed a button on his intercom. "Bring me the Vanderbilt file," he said, "and get legal in here. We are closing a deal." An hour later, I walked out of the bank. I didn't have a briefcase. I just had a single thick envelope tucked into the pocket of my overalls. The sun was high now. The city was bustling with people rushing to work, chasing money, chasing status. They didn't know that the old man in the dirty work clothes walking among them was now the owner of one of the city's oldest dynasties. I got back into my truck. I placed the envelope on the passenger seat next to my hat. It looked harmless, just a stack of paper, but it was a weapon. It was a nuclear bomb waiting for the right moment to detonate. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Henderson. The Eagle has landed. I have the paper. Keep it quiet. I want to see the look on Richard's face when I drop it on the table. Henderson replied instantly. You are a dangerous man, Luther. They are expecting a lamb, and you are bringing a lion. I started the truck. The engine roared to life. I drove back toward the farm, toward the wedding, toward the trap I had set. Now I wasn't just the father they were trying to discard. I wasn't just the obstacle in the way of their golf course. I was the landlord. I was the bank. I was the judge and the jury. And the trial was about to begin. The Emerald Bay Resort was a place built to make poor men feel small and rich men feel like gods. It sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, a sprawling palace of white marble and gold leaf that cost more per night than I made in a good harvest year. I parked my rusted truck between a Bentley and a Ferrari, the valet staring at me with his mouth open as if I had just landed a spaceship. I stepped out, smoothing the wrinkles of my charcoal suit. It was the same suit I had worn to bury Beatrice. It smelled of cedar chips and sorrow, but it was the only armor I had. Inside the ballroom was a scene from a fever dream. There were towers of champagne glasses stacked 6 feet high, shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. There were long tables groaning under the weight of ice sculptures and platters of lobster and bowls of black caviar that looked like wet gravel. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of a string quartet playing something that sounded like money. In the center of it all was Trey. My son looked like a stranger. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by a group of young men in tuxedos who laughed too loud and drank too fast. Trey was flushed, his face shiny with sweat and arrogance. He was gesturing wildly with a crystal flute, spilling wine on the floor without a care. "I just closed the deal this morning," Trey shouted, his voice booming over the music. 500 acres of prime real estate, boys. We are breaking ground on the golf course next month. It is going to be the premier club in the South. One of his friends slapped him on the back. "That is big time, Trey. What are you going to do with the commission?" Trey grinned a wide, manic smile. "I am looking at a yacht," he bragged. "A 60-footer. I'm going to dock it right down there in the marina. We are going to live like kings." I stood in the doorway watching him. He was spending money he didn't have on a future that didn't exist. He was selling a farm that wasn't his to sell. He looked at the room with the hunger of a starving wolf who finally found a carcass, but he didn't realize the meat was poisoned. I took a breath and stepped into the light. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I saw the whispers start behind hands covered in diamonds. "Who is that? Is that the help? Why is he wearing that old suit?" I kept walking, my boots clicking loudly on the marble floor. I wasn't there to make a scene. Not yet. I was there to witness the fall. But before I could get more than 10 feet into the room, a wall of white silk blocked my path. It was Paige. She looked like a queen in her designer gown, but her eyes were cold and hard as flint. She put a hand on my chest, stopping me dead. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I am coming to my son's wedding," I said calmly. "Not looking like that you are not," she snapped. She looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "You look like a gravedigger, Luther. This is a black tie event. That suit is offensive, and you are ruining my aesthetic." She pulled out her phone, checking the screen. "I have a live stream scheduled in 10 minutes, she said. "I have 50,000 followers waiting to see the entrance. You cannot be in the background. You look poor. You look dirty. You will ruin the frame." I looked at her. She was worried about a video on a phone while her entire life was built on a lie. "So where do you want me to go?" I asked. Paige pointed a manicured finger toward the far corner of the ballroom near the swinging doors of the kitchen. There was a small round table sitting in the shadows, almost hidden behind a large potted palm tree. It was the table for the vendors. The photographer's assistant was sitting there. The limo driver was sitting there. "You sit there," she ordered. "Out of sight. Do not move. Do not talk to the guests. And for God's sake, do not try to hug me." I walked to the table in the corner. I sat down next to the limo driver, a heavy-set man who looked uncomfortable in his uniform. He nodded to me. I nodded back. I felt more kinship with him than I did with anyone at the head table. I watched from the shadows as the party swirled on. It was a carnival of excess. Waiters passed trays of food that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. People laughed and toasted to the happy couple, unaware that the ground beneath them was already crumbling. A few minutes later, Trey detached himself from his admirers and walked over to my table. He didn't look happy to see me. He looked annoyed, like I was a stain on his perfect evening. He didn't sit down. He stood over me, swaying slightly. "You made it," he said, his voice thick with drink. "I told you I would stay," I said. "I keep my word." "Good," Trey said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill and flicked it onto the table. It landed in front of me next to the bread plate. "Here," he said. "What is this?" I asked, looking at the money. "Taxi fare," Trey said. "And a tip. Look, Dad, I know you don't fit in here. These aren't your people. You are probably uncomfortable. So do us both a favor. Eat some food, have a drink, and then leave." "Leave," I repeated. "Yeah, leave," Trey said. "Go home. Don't wait for the cake cutting. Don't wait for the speeches. Just slip out the back door. Don't bother us on our wedding night. We have important people to impress, and you are just bringing the mood down." He looked at me with pity mixed with contempt. "Take the money, Dad. Buy yourself something nice. Maybe a new shirt." He turned and walked away, back to the light, back to the applause, back to the lie. I looked at the bill on the table. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me. My son had just tried to pay me to disappear. He had put a price on his father's presents, and it was $100. I didn't touch the money. I left it there on the white tablecloth. I picked up a piece of chicken from my plate and took a bite. It was dry. I chewed it slowly. I wasn't leaving. I was going to stay until the very end. I wanted to see the look on his face when the music stopped. At the head table, Richard Vanderbilt was holding court. He was laughing loud, booming laughs, clapping men on the shoulder, acting like the king of the world. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and his phone on the table in front of him. Suddenly the phone vibrated. I saw it buzz against the wood. Richard glanced at it. He frowned. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again, a persistent, angry buzzing that cut through the laughter. Richard picked it up. He looked at the screen and his face changed. The red flush of alcohol drained away, leaving him pale and gray. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. He put the phone to his ear and walked away from the table, moving toward a quieter spot near the window. I watched him. I knew who was on the other end of that call. It was the bank. It was the creditors. It was the beginning of the end. Richard was gesturing wildly now. He was shouting, though I couldn't hear the words over the music. He looked like a man trying to hold back a flood with his bare hands. He hung up the phone and immediately dialed another number. He waited. He paced. He yelled again. Then another phone rang. This time it was the phone of the man sitting next to Caroline Vanderbilt, a construction magnate named Thompson. Thompson looked at his phone, read a message, and his face went hard. He looked at Richard, then he looked at Trey. He stood up without saying a word to Caroline and walked out of the room. Then another phone rang, and another. It was a chain reaction, a ripple of bad news spreading through the room like a virus. The investors, the partners, the men who had promised millions to Richard Vanderbilt were all getting the same alert. Collateral disputed, assets frozen, contracts void. I saw a waiter approach Richard. He was holding a wireless payment terminal. He whispered something to Richard. Richard waved him away angrily, pointing at Trey. The waiter walked over to Trey. Trey laughed and pulled out his black credit card. He swiped it with a flourish. The waiter looked at the machine. He shook his head. He said something to Trey. Trey frowned. He swiped the card again, harder this time. The machine beeped, a low, flat sound that signaled rejection. Trey looked confused. He pulled out another card. He handed it to the waiter. Beep. Rejected. I sat in my corner and took a sip of water. It was cool and refreshing. The music was still playing, but the energy in the room had shifted. The laughter was dying out. People were checking their phones. They were whispering. They were looking at Richard and Trey with suspicion. Richard stormed over to Trey. He grabbed Trey by the arm just like Trey had grabbed me earlier. He whispered something violent into Trey's ear. Trey looked shocked. He looked scared. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and panicked. He was looking for a lifeline. He was looking for someone to blame. His eyes swept over the crowd and landed on me. I raised my glass of water in a silent toast. The house of cards was falling. And gravity was a terrible thing. The string quartet was playing a waltz, but the rhythm of the room had changed. It was no longer the smooth sway of celebration. It was the jagged, erratic beat of panic. I watched from my table in the shadows as a man in a dark suit walked onto the floor. He was not a guest. He was the resort manager. I recognized him from the name tag on his lapel. Mr. Sterling. He moved with the grim purpose of an executioner walking toward the gallows. He didn't look at the flowers or the ice sculptures. He looked only at Trey. Trey was laughing at something one of his friends had said, holding his empty glass out for a refill that wasn't coming. When Mr. Sterling tapped him on the shoulder, Trey spun around, annoyed. He looked like a king who had been interrupted by a peasant. "Excuse me, sir," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the chatter like a knife. "We have a problem with the billing. The pre-authorization on the card on file has been voided by the issuing bank." Trey rolled his eyes. He let out a dramatic sigh for the benefit of his audience. "Voided," he repeated loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "It is probably just a fraud alert. I have been spending a lot of money today. You know how it is. Big transactions trigger the safety protocols." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sleek black metal card. It was the kind of card that was heavy in the hand. The kind of card that was supposed to open any door. He held it out between two fingers, not even looking at the manager. "Just run this one," Trey said, "and bring another bottle of Dom to the table. This is tedious." Mr. Sterling took the card. He didn't walk away to a register. He pulled a wireless terminal from his pocket. He inserted the card right there in front of everyone. The machine whirred. The little screen lit up blue. Trey smirked at Paige, who was watching with a bored expression. Then the machine beeped. A harsh, flat tone. "Transaction declined." Mr. Sterling looked at the screen, then at Trey. "I am sorry, sir. This card has been declined." Trey's laugh was brittle now. "That is impossible," he snapped. "Run it again. You probably put the chip in wrong." Mr. Sterling ran it again. "Beep." Declined. "Try the magnetic strip," Trey ordered, his voice rising. "The chip is probably faulty." Mr. Sterling swiped the card. "Beep." Declined. The silence around the head table was growing. It was spreading outward like ripples in a pond. The guests who were closest stopped eating. They put down their forks. They turned their heads. Nothing entertains rich people more than the smell of someone else's money burning. Trey's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He snatched the card back and shoved it into his pocket. He pulled out another one, a platinum card, then a gold one. "Try these," he said, throwing them onto the white tablecloth. Mr. Sterling picked up the platinum card. Beep. Declined. He picked up the gold card. Beep. Declined. "Sir," Mr. Sterling said, his voice remaining professionally flat. "The system is flagging these accounts as frozen. Not over limit. Frozen. That usually indicates a seizure order or a total asset lockdown. We require the second installment of $250,000 immediately. If payment is not rendered, we will have to pause the service and ask the guests to vacate the premises." "Vacate," Paige shrieked. She stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. "You cannot kick us out. This is my wedding. Do you know how many followers are watching this?" She grabbed her purse, the orange bag where I had planted the bug. She dug through it frantically and pulled out a silver card. "Use mine," she spat. "My father gave me this card for emergencies. And this incompetent staff is definitely an emergency." Mr. Sterling took her card. The room held its breath. Beep. Declined. Paige stared at the little machine as if it had just insulted her mother. "No," she whispered. "That card has no limit. It is linked to the family trust. The family trust that is currently being digested by the bank," I thought. The trust that was built on debt and lies. Suddenly, Richard Vanderbilt stood up. The patriarch. The man who had threatened to burn down my house. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. His face was purple. "Enough of this nonsense," Richard roared. He walked around the table, towering over the manager. "Who do you think you are? Do you know who I am? I am Richard Vanderbilt. I own half this state. I could buy this hotel and fire you just for sport." Mr. Sterling did not flinch. He did not step back. He looked at a tablet he was holding in his other hand. He scrolled down once, then he looked Richard in the eye. "I know exactly who you are, sir," Mr. Sterling said. "You are Richard Vanderbilt. And according to the notification we received from the First City Bank 10 minutes ago, You are currently in default on loans totaling $15 million. Your assets have been frozen by court order pending a foreclosure audit. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. $15 million. Frozen. Foreclosure. The guests gasped. It was a collective sound, a sudden intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The whispers turned into a roar. Did you hear that? Bankrupt. Foreclosure. I knew they were leveraging too much. Richard stumbled back. It was the first time I had ever seen him look small. He looked at his wife Caroline, who was clutching her pearls, looking around wildly for an exit. That is a lie, Richard stammered, but the fight had gone out of him. He looked at his phone, which was vibrating again on the table. He didn't answer it. He knew who it was. Trey looked at Richard. He looked at the declined cards scattered on the table. He looked at the waiters, who were beginning to clear the plates of uneaten lobster. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. Panic was giving way to rage. He needed a target. He needed someone to blame for the fact that his carriage was turning back into a pumpkin. And in his mind, there was only one person who could have caused this. He moved toward me. He didn't walk. He stormed. He knocked over a chair. He pushed a waiter aside, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass silenced the room completely. Everyone watched him. They watched the groom in his perfect tuxedo marching toward the dirty old man in the corner. Trey reached my table. He didn't stop. He grabbed the lapels of my old suit and hauled me out of my chair. He was strong, fueled by adrenaline and humiliation. "What did you do?" he screamed. His spit hit my face. "What did you do, old man? You called the bank, didn't you? You revoked the power of attorney." I didn't struggle. I let him hold me. I let the room see him shaking his own father. I let them see the violence in him. I didn't revoke anything, son, I said calmly. My voice was low, but in the silence of the ballroom it carried. I signed the paper. You have the paper. Then why is the collateral frozen? Trey yelled. The bank said the land is in dispute. Why is it in dispute if you signed the rights to me? He shook me again. My head snapped back. Tell me, he roared, or I swear to God I will finish what we started on the mountain. He stopped. He realized what he had said. The guests didn't know what he meant by the mountain, but they heard the threat. They saw the madness. I reached up and gently removed his hands from my jacket. I smoothed the fabric. I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth. I didn't revoke the power, Trey, I said. But in your rush to sell the farm this morning, you forgot to read the deed history. You forgot to do your due diligence. What history? Trey demanded, his chest heaving. The Ancestral Preservation Act of 1922. I lied. It was a beautiful lie. Simple, plausible, and completely fabricated. But Trey didn't know history. He only knew greed. What are you talking about? He asked. The south pasture, I said. The one you dug up this morning. The one where your mother is buried. That land was designated as a historical family burial ground by your grandfather. Under state law, commercial development is prohibited on any land designated for historical preservation. When you sent those bulldozers in this morning, you triggered a mandatory federal freeze on the title. I took a step closer to him. You tried to dig up your mother, Trey, and the law stopped you. No bank in America will lend against a property that is under federal investigation for desecration of a historical site. You froze your own assets the moment you dropped that blade into the dirt. Trey stared at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Richard. Richard looked horrified. You dug up a graveyard, Richard shouted. You idiot. You told me the title was clean. I didn't know, Trey stammered, backing away from me. He never told me. You never asked, I said. You were too busy trying to bury me to check if the ground was sacred. It wasn't true. There was no act of 1922. The real reason the assets were frozen was because I had bought the debt and filed a lien through the LLC. But this lie, this story of a son's greed violating the sanctity of a mother's grave, was far more damaging in front of this crowd. It painted him not just as a failure, but as a monster. The room turned on him. I could feel it. The sympathy evaporated. They weren't looking at a victim of banking errors. They were looking at a man who would bulldoze a cemetery for a golf course. I turned to Mr. Sterling, the manager. Sir, I said, I believe my son is unable to pay for this party. Mr. Sterling nodded. That appears to be the case. Then I suggest you lock the doors, I said, because I don't think they have enough gas in their cars to get home. Trey looked at me with pure hatred. You ruined everything, he whispered. No, son, I said. I just turned on the lights. You are the one who is ugly." The rumors moved through the ballroom faster than a brush fire in a drought. It started as a whisper near the bar, and within seconds it was a roar that consumed the room. The guests at the Emerald Bay Resort did not need a formal announcement to know that the ship was sinking. They saw the declined cards, they saw the manager's grim face, and they saw the panic in Richard Vanderbilt's eyes. Rich people have a survival instinct that is sharper than any blade. They know that failure is contagious. They know that being seen with a bankrupt man is a social death sentence. The exodus began. It wasn't a polite departure. It was a scramble. Men grabbed their wives by the elbow and steered them toward the exits, avoiding eye contact with the head table. They left half-eaten lobsters and full glasses of champagne. They abandoned the wedding cake that stood like a white tower in the center of the room. The room emptied with terrifying speed, leaving behind only the echo of the string quartet that had stopped playing minutes ago. Paige stood in the center of the dance floor alone. Her white dress, which had cost $10,000, looked like a shroud. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in thick black streaks, turning her face into a tragic mask. She wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was a child whose party had been canceled. She looked at the empty tables. Then she looked at Trey. "You lied to me," she screamed. Her voice cracked, breaking into a sob. "You told me you were rich. You told me the farm was worth millions. You told me you could pay for all of this." Trey tried to approach her, his hands raised in surrender. "Babe, listen," he pleaded. "It is just a bank error. We can fix this. Don't touch me," she shrieked, backing away. "You are a fraud, Trey Banks. You are just a broke country boy playing dress-up. You ruined my wedding. You ruined my reputation." She ripped the veil from her hair and threw it on the floor, stomping on the delicate lace with her heel. "I hate you," she yelled. "I hate you and your stinky father and your stupid dirt farm." She ran out of the room, her sobs echoing off the marble walls. Trey stood there watching her go. His shoulders slumped. He looked around the empty ballroom. His friends were gone. His investors were gone. Even the limo driver had slipped out the back door. He was completely alone in the wreckage of his own vanity. Richard Vanderbilt was not crying. He was seething. He watched his empire crumble in real time, and he needed someone to hurt. He needed a target for the rage that was boiling inside him. He scanned the room, and his eyes landed on me. I was still standing in the shadows, my napkin in my hand, watching the disaster unfold with a calm that must have infuriated him. He charged across the room. He was a big man used to using his size to intimidate. He moved like a bull, knocking over a chair in his path. He cornered me against the wall near the kitchen doors. His face was inches from mine, red and sweating. He smelled of sour whiskey and fear. "You think this is funny, Luther?" he growled. "You think you can play games with me?" I didn't flinch. I looked him in the eye. "I am not playing Richard," I said. "I will sue you," he shouted, slamming his hand against the wall next to my head. "I will sue you for slander. I will sue you for tortious interference. I will sue you for fraud. I will use every connection I have in this state to bury you. I have judges in my pocket, Luther. I have senators on speed dial. I will make sure you die in prison for messing with my credit." He poked a thick finger into my chest. "You messed with the wrong family dirt farmer. By tomorrow morning you won't even own the shirt on your back. I will take your land. I will take your truck. I will dig up your wife's bones myself just to spite you." I grabbed his finger. I didn't squeeze it hard enough to break it, but I held it firm. I moved it away from my chest. I stood up straighter. I let my full height fill the space. I wasn't just a farmer anymore. I was the storm he had ignored. "You should check your phone, Richard," I said. My voice was deep and calm, cutting through his bluster. What he spat, trying to pull his hand away. "Check your email," I said. "Specifically the one from Black Soil Minerals, LLC. It should have arrived 2 minutes ago." Richard stared at me. He looked confused. Why would a dirt farmer know about his email? Why would I know about a company he had never heard of? "Check it," I repeated, "unless you want the sheriff to evict you in front of your neighbors tomorrow." Richard pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He unlocked the screen. He opened his email app. I watched his eyes scan the message. I knew exactly what it said. It was a formal notice of default and immediate foreclosure on his primary residence, his vacation home, and his commercial properties. It cited the purchase of his debt by Black Soil Minerals, LLC, and the activation of the immediate repayment clause due to insolvency. The color drained from his face. It was like watching paint dry in reverse. He went from purple to gray to a sickly white. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide with terror. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man who realizes he is standing on a trapdoor. "Black soil," he whispered. "Who is black soil?" He grabbed my lapels. "Who are they, Luther?" he screamed. "How do they have my notes? How did they buy my debt?" I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the soil waiting to reclaim a body. It was the smile of a man who had waited 40 years for justice. I gently removed his hands from my suit. I smoothed the fabric. I adjusted my hat. I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. The answer was standing right in front of him, but he was too blind to see it. He couldn't imagine that the man he called Stinky was the man who now owned his life. I turned and walked toward the exit. "Who is it?" Richard screamed behind me. "Who owns me?" I kept walking. The sound of his panic was the best wedding music I could have asked for. I walked past the empty tables. I walked past Trey, who was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. I walked past the manager, who nodded at me with respect. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the ruins of their vanity behind me. The game was over. Now the harvest began. The moon was high and bright over the Alabama fields, illuminating the wreckage of the south pasture where the bulldozers had stopped their work. I sat in my favorite rocking chair in the center of the living room. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the flickering blue glow of the old television set in the corner. On my lap rested my 12-gauge shotgun. I did not load it. I did not intend to shoot my own blood, but a man does not face a pack of rabid wolves without a stick in his hand. I heard them before I saw them. The roar of engines coming up the driveway was not the steady hum of farm equipment. It was the aggressive revving of engines pushed to their limit. Tires screeched as they slammed on the brakes in the gravel, sending stones flying against the siding of the house. Car doors slammed. Voices shouted in the night. They sounded like a lynch mob. Then came the sound of breaking glass. A rock crashed through the front window, shattering the pane and sending shards skittering across the hardwood floor. It was followed by a heavy boot kicking the front door. The wood splintered around the lock. The door flew open, banging against the wall. Trey stormed in first. He was no longer the polished groom in the tuxedo. His jacket was gone. His shirt was torn and stained with sweat and wine. In his hand, he gripped a wooden baseball bat. His eyes were wild, rolling in his head like a horse trapped in a burning barn. Behind him came Richard and Caroline Vanderbilt. They looked like refugees from a disaster. Caroline was missing a shoe, limping and sobbing. Richard's face was a mask of purple rage, his expensive tie undone, his hair standing up in tufts. And finally, Paige. She was shivering, her white dress ruined with mud and grass stains, her makeup smeared into a raccoon mask of black streaks. They filled my small living room with their chaos and their smell. The smell of fear and alcohol and desperate entitlement. "There he is," Trey screamed, raising the bat. He pointed it at me. "You ruined my life. You ruined everything." Richard pushed past him, his fists clenched. "Undo it," he roared. "Call the bank right now. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you lied about the debt. Tell them Black Soil is a fraud, or I swear I will tear this house down board by board with my bare hands." I did not move. I did not flinch. I kept my hands resting lightly on the cold steel of the shotgun barrel. I looked at them calmly. I looked at the bat in my son's hand. I looked at the hatred in his eyes. He was ready to hurt me. He was ready to beat his own father to save his reputation. "You are trespassing," I said. My voice was low, but it carried through the room. Trespassing, Trey laughed. A high, hysterical sound. "This is my house, old man. I have the paper. I have the power of attorney. You are the squatter here, and I am evicting you." He took a step forward, raising the bat higher. "Fix this, Dad," he hissed. "Fix it now, or I will break every bone in your body. I have nothing left to lose. They took my car. They locked my accounts. My friends left me at the altar. You humiliated me. Now you are going to pay." Paige was screaming from the doorway. "Make him fix it, Trey. Make him give us the money. He has to have money if he bought the debt. Beat it out of him if you have to." It was a scene from hell. My family, my legacy, standing in my living room demanding my blood. They had lost their minds. Greed had stripped away their humanity, leaving only raw animal instinct. I slowly lifted one hand from the gun. Trey flinched, thinking I was going to aim it, but I didn't. I pointed a single calloused finger toward the corner of the room, toward the television. "Look," I said. Trey blinked. He looked confused. He didn't lower the bat. What he asked. "Look at the TV," I said. The volume was low, but audible. It was the local news station, WBRC, out of Birmingham. The screen showed a breaking news banner in bright red. The anchor, a woman with serious eyes, was speaking with urgency. Behind her was a graphic, a map of the county, a map with a red star right over my farm. Trey turned his head slowly. Richard stopped shouting. They looked at the screen. I reached for the remote on the side table and turned the volume up. "Breaking news tonight," the anchor said. "A massive geological discovery in central Alabama has economists and tech giants buzzing. A survey team commissioned by Black Soil Minerals has confirmed the existence of one of the largest lithium deposits in North America. The deposit, located beneath the Banks farm in Shelby County, is estimated to be worth upwards of $500 million. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the TV and the ragged breathing of the people standing in my living room. "Lithium, a key component in electric vehicle batteries, has been dubbed white gold," the anchor continued. "This discovery could reshape the entire economy of the state. Analysts say the mineral rights holder stands to become one of the wealthiest entities in the region. The value of the land alone has skyrocketed overnight. $500 million. The words hung in the air, heavy, sweet, intoxicating. I watched their faces. It was like watching a storm clear in fast motion. The rage evaporated. The desperation vanished. In its place came something even more terrifying. Hunger. Trey stared at the screen. His mouth fell open. The baseball bat slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a loud wooden clatter, but he didn't even notice. He looked at the map on the screen, then he looked at the floorboards beneath his feet. Then he looked at me. $500 million, he whispered. Richard Vanderbilt stumbled forward. He looked like he was having a stroke. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Is that true?" he wheezed. "Is that real?" "It is real," I said quietly. "The survey was finished yesterday." Trey fell to his knees. He didn't collapse from grief. He collapsed from the sheer weight of the greed that hit him. He crawled toward me on the dusty rug. His eyes were wide and shining. They were glowing with a feverish light. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, did you hear that?" I looked down at him. I looked at the son who had just threatened to break my bones. "I heard it," I said. "We are rich," Trey said. A laugh bubbled up from his throat, a wet, manic sound. "We are rich, Dad. We are not broke. We are billionaires. 500 million. Oh my God, we own it all." He reached out and grabbed my knee. His hands were shaking. "I knew it," he babbled. "I knew this land was special. I told everyone. Remember, Dad, I told you we shouldn't sell. I told you we needed to keep it in the family. We did it, Dad. We won." He was rewriting history in real time. He was erasing the last 24 hours. He was erasing the bulldozers. He was erasing the nursing home plot. He was erasing the bat he had just dropped. Paige moved then. She shoved Richard out of the way. She ran across the room and threw herself at my feet next to Trey. She pushed Trey aside, knocking him over in her haste to get to me. She wrapped her arms around my muddy boots. She pressed her face against my denim overalls. "Daddy?" she sobbed. "Oh, Daddy, I am so sorry." She looked up at me. Her mascara-stained face was twisted into a grotesque parody of affection. "I was just so stressed," she cried. "The wedding planning, the pressure. I didn't mean any of it. You know I love you, right? You are the best father in the world. I was just protecting you. I wanted to make sure you were safe." She stroked my leg. Her fingers, which had held the phone to live stream my humiliation, were now caressing the fabric of my work clothes. "We are family," she crooned. "We stick together. We forgive each other. Right, Daddy? We can build the biggest house right here. You can have the whole wing. Anything you want. We will take care of you forever." I looked at them. My son and his wife kneeling on my floor, worshiping me. But they weren't worshiping me. They were worshiping the lithium under my chair. They were worshiping the lottery ticket they thought I represented. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. The violence I could handle, the anger I could understand. But this immediate, shameless pivot, this transformation from murderers to beggars in the span of 30 seconds, it made my skin crawl. It revealed the absolute emptiness of their souls. They had no pride. Oh, they had no honor. They only had an appetite. Richard and Caroline were moving closer now, too. Richard was smoothing his hair, trying to look dignified again. Caroline was smiling a tight, tremulous smile. Luther. Richard said, his voice booming with fake conviviality. You old fox. You knew, didn't you? That is why you bought the debt. You were protecting the asset. Smart. Very smart. I respect a man who plays his cards close to the vest. He held out his hand. Partner, he said. I looked at his hand. I looked at Paige clinging to my leg. I looked at Trey, who was weeping with joy and kissing my hand. I felt a laugh building in my chest. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dark, bitter thing. Family, I said. Yes, Trey cried, looking up with adoring eyes. Yes, Dad. Family. Us against the world. I reached into the pocket of my overalls. I pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't the deed. It wasn't the debt papers. It was the folder I had taken from Trey's desk during the party. The folder containing the brochures for the state-run poorhouse. The folder containing the fake medical history he had paid to have created. I threw the folder onto the floor between them. It landed open, spilling papers across the rug. Is this how family treats? Family? I asked. Trey looked down. He saw the brochure for the South District Indigent Care Facility. He saw the forged doctor's note declaring me incompetent and dangerous. His face went pale. He looked up at me and the adoration flickered. Dad, that is not what it looks like, he stammered. It looks like you were planning to lock me in a cage, I said. It looks like you paid $50,000 to a forger to erase my mind so you could steal my pension. I stood up. I shook Paige off my leg like a tick. I gripped the shotgun. Get up, I said. They scrambled back. The fear returned, but it was different now. It was the fear of losing the prize. Dad, listen, Trey pleaded, standing up and holding out his hands. We can explain. We were desperate. But that is over now. We have the money. We don't need to do any of that. We can hire the best doctors for you. We can take you on trips. You will live like a king. I don't want to live like a king, I said. I want to live like a man who can trust his son, and that is impossible now. I kicked the baseball bat toward him. Pick it up, I said. Trey stared at the bat. What? Pick it up, I repeated. You came here to beat me. You came here to force me to sign the deed over to you again. You were ready to kill me 5 minutes ago because you thought I was poor. Now you want to kiss me because you think I am rich. I spat on the floor. At least the violence was honest, I said. This love you are showing me now. This is filth. Trey's eyes darted to the bat, then to me, then to the door. He realized the charade was over. He realized I wasn't buying it. The desperation came crashing back. The mask of the loving son dissolved and the face of the addict returned. He lunged for the bat. He grabbed it and swung it up in a blur of motion. Give me the rights, he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. Sign over the mineral rights. I know you have them. Sign them over or I swear I will bash your head in and tell the police you committed suicide. Paige screamed and scrambled backward into the corner. Richard froze. I stood my ground. I didn't raise the shotgun. I looked down the barrel of my son's rage and I saw the end of everything. Do it, son, I said softly. Show me who you really are. Trey raised the bat high, his muscles bunched. He was going to do it. He was going to kill his father for a pile of rocks. And then the room exploded in blue and red light. I looked at the weeping figures on my floor and a sound escaped my throat that was not a sob, but a laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound like dead cornstalks rubbing together in a winter wind. It started low in my chest and grew until it filled the room, bouncing off the walls that my father had built and that my son wanted to burn. It was the laughter of a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back with a price tag. Trey stopped his performance. His tears dried up instantly, as if he had turned off a faucet. He looked up at me, his face streaked with dirt and false sorrow confusion clouding his eyes. Paige released my leg and sat back on her heels, her mascara-stained eyes darting around the room trying to understand the joke. They did not understand. They could not understand that I was not laughing with them. I was laughing at the sheer absurdity of their greed. You love me. I repeated the words, tasting the bile in my mouth. You love me so much that you were willing to erase my mind to get my money. I reached down and snatched up the packet of papers I had thrown earlier. I shook them in Trey's face, the paper rattling like dry bones. Do you know what this is, son? I asked, my voice hard as granite. This is not love. This is a receipt. This is an invoice for my life. I threw the papers at him again. They fluttered down, settling on his lap. Read it, I commanded. Read the part where you certify that I am a danger to myself. Read the part where you authorize the state to medicate me until I cannot remember my own name. Read the part where you sign over my Social Security checks to your personal account. Trey looked down at the documents. He didn't read them. He knew what they said. He had paid $50,000 to have them created. $800 a month, I said, letting the number hang in the air. That is what my Social Security check is worth. $800. You were going to lock me in a warehouse full of strangers. You were going to let me rot in a bed with bed sores just so you could pocket $800 a month to pay the interest on your gambling debts. I looked at Paige. And you, I said. You were worried about my health. Is that why you looked up the life expectancy statistics for men in state care? I saw the search history page. I saw that you calculated I would be dead in 6 months. That was your timeline. 6 months to kill a man who never did anything but welcome you into his home. The room was silent except for the heavy breathing of the people who had tried to murder me. The mask of the loving family had slipped completely, and underneath was something ugly and raw. They weren't crying anymore. They were staring at me with the cold, hard eyes of people who had been caught. You thought I was stupid, I said. You thought the country boy was too slow to catch the city slickers. But you forgot one thing. A farmer knows how to spot a snake in the grass. We know how to set traps. Trey slowly stood up. The adoration was gone from his face. The desperation was gone. In their place was a hollow, dead look that chilled me to the bone. He realized that the charade was over. He realized that no amount of begging or crying was going to get him the mineral rights. He realized that I knew everything. He looked at the papers on the floor, then he looked at me. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing the dirt and sweat. You think you are so smart? He said quietly. His voice was different now. It wasn't the voice of my son. It was the voice of a stranger. You think you have won because you have a few pieces of paper, but you don't understand, Dad. I cannot lose. I literally cannot lose. If I walk out of here without that money, I am dead anyway. The people I owe money to do not file lawsuits. They break legs. They burn down houses. He took a step toward me. I am not going to let you destroy me, he said. I am not going to let you sit on a pile of money while I get buried. I held my ground. I still had the shotgun in my hand, but I lowered the barrel slightly. I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to see if there was any bottom to his barrel. It is not your money, Trey, I said. It never was. It is my money, he screamed, his face twisting into a mask of rage. It is my inheritance. It is my birthright. You are just a steward. You are just a placeholder. You were supposed to die and leave it to me. That is how it works. That is the natural order, but you are too stubborn to die. He looked around the room frantically, his eyes landing on the shotgun in my hand. Then they darted to the corner where I kept my cleaning supplies. He saw the box of shells sitting on the shelf. He looked back at me. I realized then that I had made a mistake. I had brought a gun to a knife fight, but I hadn't loaded it. I had used it as a prop, a symbol of authority, but symbols mean nothing to a man who is drowning. Trey lunged. He didn't come for me. He came for the gun. He moved with the explosive speed of youth. He grabbed the barrel of the shotgun with both hands and wrenched it violently. I wasn't expecting it. I was 67 years old and tired. He was 32 and fueled by adrenaline. The gun ripped out of my hands. Trey stumbled back, clutching the weapon. He fumbled with the action, pumping the slide. Click-clack. The sound was loud and mechanical in the small room. He didn't know it was empty. He didn't check. In his mind, he was holding a loaded weapon. He raised the shotgun and pointed it straight at my chest. The dark hole of the barrel looked like an eye staring into my soul. Sign the papers, he screamed. His hands were shaking so hard the barrel wavered. Get the deed. Get the transfer forms for the LLC. I know you have them. Sign over the mineral rights now, or I swear to God I will blow a hole in you. Trey Richard shouted, stepping forward, his hands raised. Don't be an idiot. Put the gun down. Shut up, Trey roared, swinging the barrel toward Richard, then back to me. You shut up too. You are all against me. You all want me to fail. But I am not going to fail. I am going to be rich. He looked at me with wild eyes. Do it, Dad. Sign the papers. I will tell the police it was suicide. I will tell them you were depressed about Mom. I will tell them you lost your mind. With the medical records I bought, they will believe me. They will think you were a crazy old man who took the easy way out. He was planning my murder again. But this time it wasn't a subtle poison or a push off a cliff. It was direct. It was brutal. It was the end of the line. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had taught to drive, the boy I had held when he scraped his knee. I looked for him, but he wasn't there. There was only greed standing in his shoes, holding a shotgun. "You will have to shoot me, son," I said softly. "Don't tempt me," Trey hissed. He pressed the stock against his shoulder. His finger tightened on the trigger. I watched the knuckle turn white. Paige let out a sound that was half scream, half whimper. She scrambled backward on the floor, her heels scraping against the wood. She looked at Trey, and for the first time since I met her, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. She wasn't looking at a meal ticket anymore. She was looking at a madman. "Trey," she whispered. "Trey, stop. This is murder. You cannot shoot him." Trey didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on me. "Shut up, Paige," he said through gritted teeth. "I am doing this for us. I am getting the money." "I don't want the money if we have to go to jail," Paige screamed. She stood up. Her white dress ruined her hands trembling. "I am not going to prison for you. I am not an accessory to this." She backed away, moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" Trey yelled, swinging the gun toward her for a split second. "I am leaving," Paige cried. "I am done. You are crazy. You are actually crazy." She looked at me, and I saw the shift. The allegiance broke. The rats were turning on each other. "Mr. Banks," she said, her voice high and panicked. "Mr. Banks." I had nothing to do with this part. I didn't know he had a gun. I didn't know he would go this far. "Please tell the police I tried to stop him." She was selling him out, just like she had sold me out an hour ago. She was a survivor, and survivors don't cling to sinking ships. Trey looked at her betrayal written all over his face. "You coward," he spat. "You wanted the money just as much as I did." "I wanted a golf course," Paige screamed back. "I didn't want a bloodbath." She fumbled with the doorknob, tearing it open and running out into the night. The sound of her footsteps crunching on the gravel faded away, leaving us alone in the room. Trey turned back to me. He was breathing hard, sweating profusely. He was alone now, truly alone. "It is just you and me, Dad," he said. His voice trembled, just like always. He steadied the gun. "Sign the papers," he whispered. "Last chance." I looked at the barrel. I knew the gun was empty. I knew he couldn't hurt me with a bullet. But he didn't know that. And the fact that he was pulling the trigger, the fact that he was willing to end my life for a signature, broke whatever was left of my heart. I stood tall. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. "Shoot me," I said. My voice was thunder. What Trey stammered. "If you are a killer, be a killer," I said. "Pull the trigger. End it. Show me that money is worth more than your soul. Show me that I failed completely as a father." Trey stared at me. Sweat dripped into his eyes. "I will do it," he screamed. "I will kill you. Then do it," I roared. "Stop shaking and shoot." Trey squeezed his eyes shut. He screamed a primal sound of frustration and greed, and he pulled the trigger. Click. The sound of the firing pin hitting empty air was louder than any explosion. Trey's eyes snapped open. He looked at the gun. He pumped the slide again. A shell did not eject. He pulled the trigger again. Click. He looked at me. Confusion washed over his face, followed by a dawning horror. "It is empty," I said. Trey lowered the gun slowly. He looked at the empty chamber. He looked at the man he had just tried to execute. "I never keep a loaded gun in the house, son," I said quietly. "You would know that if you ever spent any time here instead of running away." Trey dropped the shotgun. It clattered to the floor. He fell to his knees, his hands covering his face. He began to sob. Not the fake sobs of the party. These were real. These were the sobs of a man who realizes he has damned himself for nothing. I walked over to him. I looked down at the top of his head. I felt a great hollowness inside me. "You tried to kill me," I said. "You pulled the trigger." "Dad," he wept, reaching for my leg. "I didn't know. I didn't mean it." "You meant it," I said, stepping back out of his reach. "You meant every bit of it, and that is something I can never forgive." I turned away from him. I walked to the window. Outside, the red and blue lights were already pulsing against the barn wall, silently screaming in the night. Henderson had called them. The moment the first window broke, Henderson had made the call. "They are here," I said. "Who?" Trey asked, lifting his tear-stained face. "The police," I said. And as if on cue, the sirens finally cut through the air, wailing like banshees coming to collect a soul. The flashing lights painted the room in strokes of red and blue, illuminating the horror on Trey's face. He was still on his knees, staring at the empty shotgun on the floor when the front door burst open. It didn't just open. It flew off its remaining hinge, kicked in by a boot far heavier than Trey's. Henderson walked in first. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a canvas jacket and holding a flashlight that cut through the gloom like a sword. Behind him, Sheriff Miller filled the doorway, his hand resting on his holster, flanked by 2 deputies with their weapons drawn. "Drop it." "Damn," the sheriff barked, though Trey wasn't holding anything but his own head. "Hands where I can see them." Trey slowly raised his hands. They were shaking so violently I thought he might dislocate his wrists. He looked at the police, then at me, then back at the police. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches after burning down the house. "It was self-defense," Trey blurted out, his voice cracking. "He had a gun. He threatened me." Henderson stepped forward. He looked at the broken window. He looked at the splintered door frame. He looked at the baseball bat lying on the rug. Then he looked at Trey with a disgust so profound it seemed to age him 10 years. "Save it for the judge, son," Henderson said. His voice was gravel and iron. "We saw everything." "Saw what?" Trey stammered. "You just got here." Henderson pointed a finger toward the ceiling, toward the small black dome nestled in the corner of the room right above the bookshelf. It was a security camera, not a dummy, a high-definition night vision camera with audio recording. "Live feed," Henderson said. "Streamed directly to the sheriff's station and my private server. We saw you break in. We saw you threaten him with the bat. We saw you pull the trigger on an unarmed man. We heard every word." Trey's face went white. He realized there was no lie big enough to cover this. He realized the world had watched him try to murder his father. Richard Vanderbilt tried to slip into the background, moving toward the shadows near the kitchen, but a deputy spotted him. "Stay where you are," the deputy shouted. "I didn't do anything," Richard yelled, raising his hands. "I was just here to mediate. I tried to stop him." "We heard you too, Richard," Henderson said, shining the flashlight in his face. "We heard you demand he sign the papers. We heard you threaten to tear the house down. That is conspiracy to commit extortion and assault. You are just as guilty as he is." The deputies moved in. They grabbed Trey by the arms and hauled him to his feet. He didn't fight. He went limp, a dead weight of shame and failure. As they cuffed him, the metal clicking shut with a sound of finality, the room seemed to exhale. The violence was over. The law had arrived. But the betrayal wasn't finished. Paige was cowering in the corner near the fireplace, hugging her knees. When the deputies approached her, she scrambled up, her eyes wide and manic. She pointed a shaking finger at Trey. "It was him!" she shrieked. "It was all him. He forced me to come here. I didn't want to do it." Trey looked at her, his eyes dull. "What?" "He is crazy," Paige yelled, looking at the sheriff. "He has been talking about killing his father for weeks. He said he needed the money to pay off his gambling debts. He told me if I didn't help him, he would hurt me too. I am a victim here. I tried to run away." It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't heard her plotting in the kitchen, if I hadn't heard her call me a liability, I might have believed her. She was throwing her husband to the wolves to save her own skin. Trey stared at her. The dullness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a spark of pure hatred. He struggled against the deputies holding him. "You liar!" Trey screamed. Spittle flew from his lips. "It was your idea. You were the one who found the poor house. You were the one who told me to mortgage the farm. You said you wouldn't marry me unless I was rich." "He is lying," Paige sobbed, tears streaming down her face again. "He is a monster. Look what he did to his own father. I was scared for my life." "You wanted the golf course," Trey roared. "You wanted the clubhouse. You called him a stinky old man. Don't you dare put this on me." "That is enough," the sheriff bellowed. "You can tell your stories in the interrogation room. Get them out of here." The deputies dragged Trey toward the door. He was still screaming at Paige, cursing her, cursing me, cursing the world that had denied him his prize. Another deputy grabbed Paige. She didn't fight physically, but she fought with her words. "I am a Vanderbilt," she shouted. "You can't arrest me. My father will have your badges. Daddy, tell them." She looked at Richard, expecting him to save her, but Richard was already in cuffs, being led out by another officer. He looked old and defeated. He didn't even look at his daughter. He was too busy thinking about his frozen assets and his ruined reputation. Caroline followed him, weeping silently, her shoes crunching on the broken glass. They marched them out in a line. My son, my daughter-in-law, my in-laws, the family I thought I was building. They were paraded past me like prisoners of war. Trey stopped as he passed me. The deputies tried to push him forward, but he dug his heels in. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were red and wet. "Why didn't you just die?" he whispered. "It would have been so much easier." I looked at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a vast, echoing emptiness where my love used to be. "Easy is for people who don't have to look at themselves in the mirror," I said. "Goodbye, son." The deputy shoved him through the door. I watched him disappear into the flashing lights of the cruisers. The room was suddenly quiet. Henderson walked over to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, Luther?" he asked softly. I looked around the room, the broken window, the smashed door, the spilled papers, the shotgun on the floor. It was a wreck. It looked like a battlefield. "I am alive," I said. "They are going away for a long time," Henderson said. "Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, extortion, breaking and entering, plus the fraud charges from the bank. They won't see the outside of a cell for 20 years. I nodded. Justice. It was supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel like victory. But it didn't. It felt like amputation. I had cut off the rot, but I had lost a limb in the process. "What about the lithium?" I asked. Henderson smiled grimly. "The lithium is safe. The trust is ironclad. They can't touch it. Even if they weren't going to prison, they couldn't touch it. You won, Luther. You saved the farm." I walked to the window. I watched the police cars pull away, their sirens wailing into the night. I watched the red taillights fade until they were just specks in the darkness. "I saved the dirt," I said, "but I lost the crop." Henderson stood beside me. "You can always plant again, Luther. The soil is still good." I looked at him, my friend, my brother in arms. He was right. The soil was still there. Beatrice was still there under the oak tree. The memories were still there in the walls. "Yes," I said, "we can plant again." I turned away from the window. I picked up the baseball bat from the floor and leaned it against the wall. I picked up the folder of papers and put it on the table. I picked up the shotgun and put it back in the cabinet. I started cleaning up the glass, one shard at a time. It was slow work, but I had time. I had the rest of my life, and for the first time in a long time, that life belonged only to me. The interrogation room at the Shelby County Sheriff Department smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was a small, windowless box painted a depressing shade of gray that seemed designed to suck the hope out of anyone who sat inside it. Trey sat on one side of the metal table, his hands cuffed to a steel bar bolted to the floor. Richard Vanderbilt sat next to him, looking like a deflated balloon in his ruined tuxedo shirt. They had spent the night in the holding cell. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind only the cold, hard reality of their situation. But even now, even in chains, the arrogance had not completely left them. They were men who had spent their lives believing that money could fix anything. They believed that the law was something that happened to other people, poor people, not to Vanderbilts or banks. I watched them from the other side of the one-way glass, standing next to Henderson. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to breathe the same air as them. I just wanted to see the end. I nodded to Henderson. He adjusted his tie, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked into the room. When the door opened, Trey looked up. His eyes lit up with a desperate sort of hope. He sat up straighter, rattling the chains. "Henderson," he said, his voice raspy from a night of screaming. "Thank God. You are here to represent us right. Dad sent you. I knew he wouldn't leave me here. He knows I am his only heir." Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Listen, Henderson. This is all a big misunderstanding. A domestic dispute that got out of hand. We are willing to make a deal. We will drop any counterclaims against Luther for the emotional distress if he drops the charges. And we need to talk about the asset management. Obviously, I cannot manage the lithium project from a cell, but I have associates who can set up the trust structure." Henderson didn't say a word. He walked to the empty chair across from them and sat down. He placed his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound was loud in the small room. Snap, snap. He pulled out a single thin file folder and placed it on the table. He folded his hands on top of it. "I am not here to represent you," Henderson said, his voice calm and dry. "I represent Luther Banks. And I represent the entity that actually matters in this conversation." Trey scoffed. A nervous sound. "What entity?" "Dad is the entity. He owns the land, and I am his son. Even if I go to prison for a few years, I am still the next of kin." "You cannot change biology, Henderson. When the old man kicks the bucket that $500 million comes to me, that is the law." He looked at Richard, seeking validation. Richard nodded. "That is right. You can put us away, but you cannot strip the inheritance. That mineral deposit is a family asset. We are willing to negotiate a percentage for the legal fees, but the bulk of it stays with Trey. We are thinking long-term here." They were still doing it. They were sitting in handcuffs, facing 20 years in prison for attempted murder, and they were still counting money. They were still planning how to spend the lithium profits. It was a sickness, a disease of the soul that had eaten away everything human inside them. Henderson looked at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. He opened the file folder. "You boys are making a fundamental mistake," Henderson said. "You are operating under the assumption that Luther Banks owns the lithium." Trey frowned. "Of course he owns it. He owns the farm. We checked the deed. Surface and subsurface rights were intact when Granddad bought it in 1940. We did our due diligence." "You checked the deed from 1940. Henderson agreed. "But you didn't check the transfer records from 10 years ago." "Transfer records?" Trey asked. His face went still. "What transfer records?" Henderson slid a document across the metal table. It was a photocopy of a deed of transfer stamped with the official seal of the county clerk. It was dated 10 years ago, 2 weeks after Beatrice died. "Read it," Henderson said. Trey leaned forward as much as the cuffs would allow. He read the document. I watched through the glass as his eyes moved across the lines of text. I saw the moment the words hit his brain. I saw his pupils dilate. I saw his mouth open slightly. He stopped breathing. Richard, impatient, craned his neck to see. "What does it say?" "It says," Trey whispered, his voice trembling. "It says that Luther Banks severed the estate." Henderson nodded. "That is correct. 10 years ago your father came to me. He was grieving. He was worried about the future. He wanted to ensure that the land would always serve a purpose, even if he wasn't there to tend it. So we split the rights. Luther Banks retained the surface rights, the right to farm, the right to live in the house, the right to walk on the grass. And the minerals Richard demanded. The lithium. Who owns the minerals?" Henderson smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. "The mineral rights," Henderson said, clearly enjoying every syllable. "Along with all subsurface assets, known and unknown, were transferred in their entirety to an irrevocable charitable trust." "A trust," Trey said blankly. "The Beatrice Banks Memorial Trust," Henderson said. "A non-profit organization dedicated to providing agricultural scholarships and housing support for underprivileged youth in Alabama." The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to roar. Trey stared at the paper. He shook his head. No, that cannot be right. Dad doesn't have a trust. He is a farmer. He doesn't know how to do that." "He knew enough to hire me," Henderson said, "and he knew enough to know that money changes people. He wanted to protect the legacy." Richard looked like he was going to be sick. He slumped back in his chair, the chains pulling tight against his wrists. "So Luther doesn't own it," Richard wheezed. "No," Henderson said. "Luther is simply the appointed guardian of the trust. He manages the surface. For his services as guardian, he is paid a stipend." "How much?" Trey asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "How much is the stipend?" $1 a year, Henderson said. $1. Trey looked up at Henderson. His face was a mask of pure shock. $1. "That is right," Henderson said. "Your father has been sitting on a fortune for 10 years and he hasn't taken a dime of it. He lives off his crops. He lives off his sweat. Because he believes that what comes from the earth belongs to the future, not to his pocket." Trey started to laugh. It was a high, broken sound. It sounded like glass grinding in a disposal. "So you are telling me he choked out. You are telling me that I tried to kill my father. I tried to gaslight him into an asylum. I mortgaged the farm. I ruined my life. I am going to prison, and I did all of it to steal from a charity." Henderson closed the folder. Essentially, yes, Henderson said. You tried to rob orphans, Trey, and you failed. Trey stopped laughing. He stared at the metal table. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him like a collapsing building. It wasn't just that he had lost. It was that there was no prize to begin with. Even if he had succeeded, even if he had driven me crazy, even if he had killed me, he would have inherited the surface rights to a farm that he couldn't sell because it was tied to a trust he couldn't break. He would have inherited a tractor and a house. But the millions, the white gold, it was never his. It never would have been his. He had sold his soul to the devil, and the devil had paid him in counterfeit bills. Richard turned on Trey. The alliance of greed shattered in an instant. You idiot, Richard screamed, spitting in Trey's face. You told me you checked everything. You told me the assets were liquid. You dragged me into this. I lost my business because of you. I am going to jail because of you. It is your fault, Trey screamed back, lunging at Richard until the chains jerked him back. You were the one who needed the money. You pushed me. You and your greedy daughter. You made me do this. Gentleman, Henderson said, standing up. His voice cut through their bickering. Save it for your cellmates. I just wanted you to know before you go to trial. There is no deal to be made. There is no money to bargain with. Luther has nothing to give you because he owns nothing. He picked up his briefcase. And by the way, Henderson added, looking at Trey, the trust has a morality clause for any potential beneficiaries. Convicted felons are automatically disqualified from receiving any aid or association with the trust. So even if you get out in 20 years, son, you won't even be able to apply for a scholarship to learn how to farm. You are cut off, completely, permanently. Trey looked at Henderson. Then he looked at the mirror where he knew I was standing. He couldn't see me, but he knew I was there. Dad, he screamed. Dad, please. You can change the trust. You can fix this. Don't let me rot in here for nothing. I watched him scream. I watched him beg. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It was the peace of the final harvest. The work was done. The weeds had been pulled. I turned away from the glass. I didn't need to hear anymore. Henderson walked out of the room, closing the heavy door behind him, muffling the screams of the damned. He looked at me and nodded. It is over, Luther, he said. I nodded back. I adjusted my hat. Let's go home, Henderson, I said. I have fields to plow, and Beatrice's garden needs replanting. We walked out of the police station into the bright morning sun. The air smelled fresh. It smelled of rain and soil. It smelled of a new beginning. I was 67 years old. I had no son. I had $1 a year, and I was the richest man in the world. The gavel hit the wood block with a sound that felt like a heavy door slamming shut forever. The courtroom was silent as Judge Patterson read the sentence. 15 years in a federal penitentiary for Trey Banks. The charges were a laundry list of betrayal, including conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and elder abuse. My son stood there in his orange jumpsuit, and for the first time in his life, he looked small. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the weeping page in the gallery. He looked at me. His eyes were dry and empty. He mouthed the word goodbye, but no sound came out. I watched the bailiffs lead him away. The chains around his ankles clinked with a rhythm that sounded like a funeral march. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the heavy finality of a harvest that had yielded only weeds. The fall of the Vanderbilt dynasty was even faster and more brutal than their rise. With their assets frozen and their reputation in tatters, the creditors descended like locusts. I stood in the crowd at the auction a month later and watched strangers bid on their furniture, their art, and their silver. Richard stood outside the gates, watching his life being sold off piece by piece. He looked old and shrunken in a suit that no longer fit him. He tried to catch my eye, but I looked through him like he was made of glass. They lost everything. The mansion, the cars, the country club membership. They were evicted 2 weeks later. The irony was so sharp it could cut skin. The only housing they qualified for was in the South District housing projects, the exact same place they had plotted to send me. They were now living in a cramped apartment with thin walls and the smell of boiled cabbage, surrounded by the people they used to mock. And Paige, the ice queen who was worried about her aesthetic, found her new reality the hardest to swallow. She wasn't a socialite anymore. She was the wife of a convict and the daughter of failures. I saw her a few months later. I had stopped at a roadside diner for coffee, and there she was wearing a stained apron and comfortable shoes, pouring refills for truckers who didn't care about her last name. She saw me sitting in the booth. Her hand trembled and coffee sloshed onto the table. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, but then she saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't anger, it was indifference. She closed her mouth, turned around, and went back to the kitchen. She had wanted to be served her whole life, but now she was the one serving. Justice had a way of balancing the scales that no lawyer could ever match. The farm remained, the soil remained, but the world beneath it had awakened. The mining operation began 3 months after the trial. It wasn't the destructive, scarring strip mine that Trey had envisioned. The Beatrice Banks Memorial Trust hired engineers who knew how to extract the lithium with surgical precision. They built the access points away from the house, away from the fields hidden behind the tree line. The low hum of the machinery became the heartbeat of the land, a constant reminder of the fortune that lay beneath the roots of my cotton. The money began to flow. It didn't go to yachts or penthouses. It went where it was supposed to go. The trust funded scholarships for kids in the county who had the grades but not the cash. It fixed roofs for widows. It bought books for the school library. But the board of directors insisted on one change. They called me into a meeting in the new office they had built in town. They sat me down at a long table that smelled of lemon polish. Luther, the chairman, said, "You have done a great service to this community, but $1 a year is not a wage. It is an insult." We took a vote. They handed me a contract. It was a salary for my role as the guardian of the surface rights. It wasn't $500 million, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to never worry about the price of seed again. It was enough to fix the roof and paint the barn. It was enough to buy dignity. I went straight to the dealership and bought the new tractor, a John Deere with an enclosed cab and air conditioning and a radio. I paid cash. The salesman looked at my overalls and hesitated just for a second, but then he saw the check and his smile got real wide. I drove it home slow, savoring the cool air on my face, listening to the radio playing blues. I parked it in the barn next to the old rusted one. I patted the hood of the old machine, thanking it for its service, but I knew I would never have to sweat in the sun like that again. I hired a crew to fix the house, not to tear it down, but to heal it. They replaced the rotting boards on the porch. They painted the siding a bright, crisp white that shone in the sun. They fixed the plumbing and the wiring. They replanted Beatrice's garden, filling the south pasture with zinnias and marigolds until it looked like a quilt made of flowers. I sat on the porch in my new rocking chair and watched them work. The house breathed a sigh of relief. It was safe. It was home. It is a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. The air is thick with pollen and the scent of turning earth. I am sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, the condensation dripping onto my hand. The yard is full of noise. It is the best kind of noise. It is the sound of children laughing. A yellow school bus is parked in the driveway. 20 kids from the inner city scholarship program are running through the fields. They are chasing butterflies. They are digging in the dirt with plastic shovels. They are learning where their food comes from. They are learning that the earth is not dirty, it is alive. One little boy about 10 years old walks up to the porch. He is wearing new sneakers that he is trying very hard not to get muddy. He looks at me with big, curious eyes. "Mr. Banks," he says, "is it true what they say?" "What do they say, son?" I ask, rocking slowly. "They say you are a millionaire," the boy says, "but you look like a farmer." I smile. I look at his sneakers. I look at the fields stretching out to the horizon, green and lush. I look at the oak tree where Beatrice is resting in the shade. "I am a farmer's son," I say. "That is the most important thing I am. The money is just manure. It is only good if you spread it around to help things grow. If you pile it up, it just stinks." The boy nods seriously as if I have just told him the secret of the universe. He runs back to his friends who are yelling about finding a worm. I take a sip of my tea. It is sweet and cold. I close my eyes and feel the sun on my face. I can feel Beatrice sitting next to me. I can hear her voice in the wind. "You did good, Luther," she whispers. "You protected the land. You protected our name." I open my eyes. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The air smells of rich black soil and blooming flowers. It is the smell of my life. I lean forward and look directly at you. So remember this the next time you see an old man in dirty overalls standing in the corner of a fancy room. Remember this when you see someone driving a rusted truck down the highway. Don't turn up your nose. Don't whisper to your friends. Don't judge a farmer by the mud on his boots. Because you never know what he is standing on. He might be standing on a gold mine, or he might just be standing on his principles. And in the end, those are the only two things that really matter. I am Luther Banks. I am the guardian of the black soil, and I am finally at peace. This journey taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or acres of land. It is measured in integrity. My son chased the illusion of riches and lost his soul while I held on to the dirt and found a legacy. We live in a world that is quick to judge a book by its cover, or a man by his overalls. But remember, the shiniest apples are often rotten at the core, while the roughest roots sustain the tree. Don't let greed blind you to the value of loyalty, and never underestimate the quiet strength of a man who knows exactly who he is. If you believe justice was served today, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the Heartland. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Trey, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Get exactly what he deserved. 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 Get exactly what he deserved.